Good evening and welcome to the special election 2016 edition of the Vision Root video blog. I'm your host, Richard Urban, coming to you from historic Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Well, tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. And as I promised, we're doing 7 videos prior to the 2016 president's election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And tonight I'm going to talk about Hillary Clinton and women's rights. We're going to look at what she's been saying and how, if she's really a women's right proponent. And we're also going to look at some of the positions of Donald Trump. And we'll look not only at positions, but actions. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'll be looking at different clips, sound and video clips of the candidates. And there was a very recent interview with Mrs. Clinton, actually within the last 24 hours. Part of it is excerpted from Sirius FM. So I'm going to play part of her clip, and I'd like you to, have a listen to this clip, and then so we're going to have different clips and videos and some interviews with some of the other women, and we're going to look at a number of materials and see if Mrs. Clinton is really a proponent of women's rights. So let's go now to the first clip. Let's look at her words on today's interview on Sirius XM radio.
Your opponent, Donald Trump, Secretary Clinton, says that you're going to start World War III, which is ridiculous. She's going to start World War III. Insane.
Yeah.
But
right. Well,
but I think we can make the argument that if he's elected, that he and his policies will wage war on women's health and on women seeking justice in cases of sexual assault. Wouldn't he wage that kind of war against women?
Well, I think he's been pretty clear that he has a very negative view about so many groups of Americans, obviously women, who he has been insulting throughout his campaign. And then the tape of his talking about assaulting women came to light. And he's now, rather than campaigning on issues, claiming he's going to sue everybody who's never said anything negative about him. So, yeah, I think that's right.
And particularly what he said at the last debate about women having ninth-month abortions, and you described it rightly as fear-mongering. I mean, that's what we would have to look forward to under a Donald Trump presidency, wouldn't it? That type of fear-mongering.
Yes, it is. It's fear-mongering, and it's also just blatant bigotry. The kind of false information and hateful comments that he's been making repeatedly have hurt a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I meet hundreds of people every day, and it's not just politics as usual. People are scared. I've had mothers write to me. A mother wrote to me about her son who had been adopted from Ethiopia when he was a toddler, and they live now in the United States. It's the only country he's ever been in. And her son said to his mother, after hearing Donald Trump, will he send me back to Ethiopia? And I've met Muslims, I've met Latinos, young children who have started to cry in front of me because Donald Trump is going to round up their parents and deport them. And so everything this man has said has hurt people. And so that, among many reasons, is why he should never be near wielding real power. He is temperamentally unfit and unqualified to be our president.
Okay, when we look at that clip, we can see what an incredible two-faced liar Mrs. Clinton is, always using hyperbole. In fact, I heard her say exactly the same thing, and using these examples like, this poor Nigerian boy is trying to, they're going to send me back. What a bunch of crock. What is Mrs. Clinton saying? So she's saying she's a big proponent of women's rights. Okay, Mrs. Clinton is a proponent of women's rights. Well, let's look at that. So Mrs. Clinton is the one who, during her husband's presidency, and we have clear records that he's raped and had sexual relations and raped some 20 women. One of them is Kathleen Willey. And, so what did Mrs. Clinton do? Did she work to change her husband, her philandering husband? Or did she work to destroy those women who her husband raped? Well, in fact, she worked to destroy those women, and many of them, like Jennifer Flowers and Kathleen Willey, have come forward. And so let's look at the words of Kathleen Willey right now.
Would not include using private investigators to intimidate. Those allegations come from several women involved with Bill Clinton, including Jennifer Flowers, Elizabeth Ward Grayson, Paula Jones, and Kathleen Willey.
The scare tactics, being followed, being audited by the IRS, their homes broken into. I mean, where does it end?
Clinton supporter and campaign worker Kathleen Willey was a White House volunteer who alleges that President Clinton sexually assaulted her during a meeting in the private study off the Oval Office in November of 1993.
I kept thinking to myself, what in the hell is he doing? That's what I kept thinking, and which sounds silly at the time, but I was getting embarrassed for him. If that's just, this is just not proper. You have to remember, this was at the time when there was a lot of speculation about his womanizing, and I was the loyal Democrat, and I would not allow myself to believe that that was true. I just thought it was all just rumor.
Willey believes that Hillary Clinton was well aware of the tactics used by the Clinton White House to intimidate perceived enemies. Willey says 2 days before she was set to testify against President Clinton in the Paula Jones sexual harassment case, a stranger confronted her.
We passed, and he stopped, and he said, "Hey, Kathleen, did you ever find your cat?" And then he said, rather ominously, "Yeah, that bullseye was a really nice cat." And that's what I thought, that something else was going on here. He stood back and he said, "You're just not getting the message, are you?"
The Clinton attack machine immediately targeted Willey. However, there are corroborating witnesses. Jared Stern, a former Marine, later told congressional investigators he was hired to investigate Kathleen Willey during a clandestine nighttime meeting.
It was late at night. He called me, asked me to meet him here.
So we can see how she worked to destroy this woman. And we can also see in these words of Dick Morris, one of her former employees of the Clintons, how she hired FBI investigators to follow and harass, do things like put dead cat skulls on, have people making anonymous phone calls, and threaten these women. So, of course, Mrs. Clinton is a great proponent of women's rights. Not. Let's look at this clip of Dick Morris.
If you put me to work for you, I'll work to lift people up, not push them down.
I finally parted company with Hillary Clinton when I saw how she was using private detectives to investigate the women who were linked to her husband. Not to change him, not to reform him, not to make him a better person, but to cow the women into silence so that he could get elected president. I do not want that woman controlling the IRS or the DEA or the NSA or the FBI or the CIA. Not in a democracy.
I'd also like to point out how Mrs. Clinton, through the Clinton Foundation, and we're going to dedicate another one of these videos to that, how she took millions, the emails just came out, where she took 12 million from Morocco. But in any case, she also took millions from Saudi Arabia, one of the most oppressive countries in the world, through the Clinton Foundation. So she's definitely for women's rights, unless you give her a lot of money. She's certainly not for women's rights. Women in Saudi Arabia don't even drive at all. And Qatar is also an oppressive country toward women. So how could, she be a champion of women's rights? Also, Mrs. Clinton says she's also for women's rights. That is, unless you happen to be a female in the womb and you're about to be born, of course, you can be killed. So what if you were going to be a great person? What if your mother was about to abort you? I guess you wouldn't be listening to this video, would you? Well, Mrs. Clinton thinks that's fine. When Mrs. Clinton talks about women's rights, she's primarily talking about the right to kill babies. if that's a right. Well, I disagree. That's not a right. That's murder. But so she wants to kill babies that are even old enough to be born, falsely claiming that these abortions, some 12,000 are a year in the United States, very late term abortions, almost when the baby's due, are for the health of the woman. No, that's basically never the case. So Mrs. Clinton is 100% National Abortion Rights Activist League. She gets 100%. So what she calls women's rights is really not women's rights, it's abortion rights. And what she calls women's rights is not really women's rights, it's Mrs. Clinton rights to collect money from whoever she wants. She is such a two-faced liar. If you vote for this woman, I don't know what. How could she be for women's rights? She's for her own right to collect money. She doesn't care about the women in Saudi Arabia. She doesn't care about aborted babies. She's a radical, crazy person. So she's not for women's rights. Don't tell me she's for women's rights. And this two-faced talk, if you listen to many of her speeches, I've not only heard that, she's such a two-faced liar, you know. Oh, yes, I'm for women's rights, and Donald Trump, he's such a terrible person. Well, let me tell you something about Donald Trump. Yes, he's been known to be a woman's man. Okay, he was a playboy, but you know what? Since he's been married since January 2005 to Melania, he's not a playboy anymore. Look at his children. Look at his family. They're hardworking. And they are excellent children. And even Mrs. Clinton said in the debates that she was admiring his children. That really shows what kind of man he is. And so also he's against late-term abortions and abortions in generally. Abortions are not about women's rights. That's a women's right to have an abortion? How is that for women's rights? It's against the right of the women / innocent, completely innocent babies in the womb. But what it's really about is a license, a sexual license. So, I mean, we're going to have another clip, or one of my videos will be dedicated to children's rights. She claims to be for children's rights. Right, okay, children's rights, as long as you're not in the womb. And by the way, what is the most safest and best place for children? It's in a married two-parent family. So in recent years, she's become a convert to promoting homosexual relationships, which are not safe places for children. So don't tell me she's for women's and children's rights. She is a two-faced liar. She talks about whatever is convenient and carrying on these diatribes about Donald Trump, and what he said about women. What the heck? She lies all the time and carries on rants and everything else. So even her supporters admit that she's a liar, as I pointed out in my last video. So, let's look at this final clip from Robert Novak, what he thinks about Mrs. Clinton's integrity and how she operates.
The most important thing I would study is her conduct as First Lady, not as Senator, and her lack of sensitivity to civil liberties, of privacy, using the Internal Revenue Service, her hostility to opponents, her hardness, her meanness. The Clinton administration, almost from its first day, started using the IRS as a threat.
So in conclusion, when Mrs. Clinton says women's rights, what she's really talking about is abortion rights, so-called rights. And she's also talking about, not talking about, I should say, what makes the most safest and best place for girls to grow up and become healthy young women. Well, it's stable two-parent married families. How is Mrs. Clinton promoting that? She's not. You ever hear her talking about that? No. Mrs. Clinton is in pocket of special interests. She's a pay-to-play politician. She takes huge donations through her foundation. 90% of the money in her foundation is never spent. She creates huge disasters. We'll deal more with the foundation in another video. So I'd like you to consider and see clearly that the choice is clear. If you want a decent, honest person go with Mr. Trump. If you want a two-faced liar who says she's for women's rights, but grabs a lot of money from the most oppressive countries in the nation, is for aborting any babies, and if, at any time, and is completely unethical and is willing to use the IRS or the FBI to attack the very women her husband raped, if you think that's a women's right advocate, hello, maybe, wow, what else can I say? You are crazy. Okay, you truly have not looked at the issues. So this is Richard Urban. I'm talking about who is for women's rights. Well, it's certainly not Mrs. Clinton. Mr. Trump is a much more friendly for women, business friendly, not for abortion friendly, not a two-faced liar friendly than Hillary Clinton. And that's my report for tonight. This is Richard Urban. I'm reporting from historic Harpers Ferry. Until next time, don't forget to vote on November 8th. God bless you and have a great night.